today am honoring this event, this conference, named Armenophobia, Historical and Present-Day Resurgence. We are very happy to receive you here. You are most probably for this legislation, for this parliamentary term, our very last event, and hopefully the lucky one. So on behalf of MEP Eleni Theoharous and Kaspar Karabekyan, President of the EAFDJ group federation, we are welcoming you, and we would like to present you. I would like to present you the speakers who are in the panel right now. The floor will take. The very first person who will take the floor will be Ms. Eleni Theoharous, member of the European Parliament, president of the EU Armenia Friendship Group in the European Parliament, politician for quite many years in the Cypriot Parliament as well as in the European Parliament, medical doctor, poet, humanitarian with humanitarian activity, and I would like to give her the floor so that she can say 2 words to you and welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Well, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues, Your Excellency, Mr. Ashot Julian, Speaker of the Parliament of Artsakh, Mrs. Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Artsakh, Armine Alexanian, Mr. former Ombudsman, current Ombudsman, esteemed colleagues, excellencies, I am delighted to host this event today. As Mary said, it is the last one of this mandate, but not the last one in our political life. We are fighting, we are striving for the rights of the Armenian people and the Armenians of Artsakh. We are fighting in the European Parliament through the European Union Armenia Friendship Group, which I'm chairing. I have the honor to chair, and who is an active part of the game for the self-determination of the people of Artsakh and for the prosperity and happiness and wealthiness of the people of Armenia around the globe. I'm very happy to host this event, and we are going to talk about a controversial, let's say, term, Armenophobia, which in the correct form is Armenophobia. It's a Greek word, as you know, Armenophobia. Although I prefer to speak Armenophilia, the friendship to the Armenians. I don't know if it's the best way to express what we want to say, because in one way it has the meaning of a threat coming from a nation, which is not the fact. Everybody knows how peaceful is the Armenian people and how devoted they are to the friendship and the love between nations, but they are strong fighters when it comes to defend their dignity, their country, their proud. I can say that as an Armenian because, you know, I am citizen of Stepanakert since last September, and I'm very proud for that. I would also like to say good morning to the Azeri people who might be in this room spying, and I want to tell them that they have nothing to be aware of. Don't be afraid, we are very friendly, and even if you start swearing us tomorrow, we will still sympathize you. Dear friends, welcome to the European Parliament. For 10 years I am a member of this House, and today I realize how difficult it is to get your guests in the House, because I had always good advisors and good colleagues in the office. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Irene. Thanks to everybody who assists in order to organize this event. Welcome.
Thank you very much, the member of the European Parliament, Eleni Theoharous. I would like now to give the floor to Mr. Kaspar Karapetyan, who's the president of the European Armenian Federation for Justice and Democracy since 2012, and who holds a very precious place in our hearts, as not only he has held the post of the chairman of the Armenian National Committee of Greece, but he has been a very, very precious colleague and collaborator for all those years, promoting the ideals and the principles of democracy and justice, not only for Armenia, but globally, I would say. So, Mr. Karapetyan, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. Honorable President of the National Assembly of the Republic of Artsakh, Honorable Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Artsakh, Ms. Armine Alexandrian, Honorable Member of the European Parliament, Dr. Eleni Theoharous, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to Dr. Eleni Theoharous, who once again is hosting our conference in the European Parliament, thus supporting us in presenting some aspects of the situation in South Caucasus. And as Mary said, I am sure that this is a lucky conference, the last event as the office of Eleni Theoharous, and I am sure that she will be back in the next legislative also, and will have the opportunity to have more and more conferences to organize in the future. I would like to thank also the Armenian benevolent Tufenkian Foundation for its help to realizing today's conference. The aim of the conference is to highlight the hate brainwashing of the regime in Turkey during the period of the genocide of 1915, unfortunately continued today by the regime of Mr. Erdogan, and of course the Armenophobic policy of the regime of Mr. Aliyev in Azerbaijan. In a while, our distinguished guests will present all the aspects of this policy. The reason we insisted on this topic is because we are destined as Armenians, Azerbaijanis, and Turks to live together in the same region, side by side. Our wish and will is to have good neighborly relations, which of course is in the interest of all of us. But the continuous anti-Armenian rhetoric poisons the people of Turkey and Azerbaijan, and especially the young generation, against Armenians. Unfortunately, we had many tragic examples of this hate policy, lately in last April during the 4 Days War, and previously with Sakharov case, which I am sure that some of these examples will be presented by our guest speakers. By presenting today's topic, we do not want to spread oil on the fire, but in contrary, we want to highlight the disastrous results for the future of this hate policy, which, if continued the same path, will make more and more difficult the coexistence of our peoples. We really hope that in nowadays, Mr. Aliyev and his regime will understand that his policy will not lead to any solution, and on the contrary, it will make it more and more difficult. And since we are in the European Parliament, the heart of the human rights principle of the peoples, we urge the relevant bodies of the EU, and especially the special representative of the European Union on human rights, to encourage Azerbaijan to stop the hatred policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Karapetyan. I have the honor to have here with us in the panel Mr. André Boumouchian. He's a Belgian Armenian philanthropist and entrepreneur who was elected Vice President of the Armenian Committee of Belgium in 2007 and founded the Armenian Community Center in Brussels in 2013. He's here with us today to share his experience and his thoughts. La parole est à vous, Monsieur Boumouchian.
Merci beaucoup. Dear Dr. Eleni Theocharous, dear members of the NKR government, dear distinguished panelists, dear guests. Welcome to this conference. My name is André Boumouchian. I'm a trustee of the Tufenkian Foundation. We are active in Armenia and in Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, where we implement a number of projects. In a way, the conference of today can be tied to last year's colloquium on remedial secession, which we organized with a number of legal experts in international law. We at the Tufenkian Foundation continue our efforts to collaborate with the NKR government and the European Armenian Federation. During the colloquium of last year, a number of points came out which were very interesting, central of which was, of course, the right of self-determination, which is the center of the UN Charter. But there was also a very important point that stood out, and it was the following. There has to be confidence-building measures implemented if we have to have any lasting peace between Artsakh and Azerbaijan. And it is indeed so evident. What good is it to negotiate if there's not the most basic respect between both people? The atmosphere of intolerance in Azerbaijan has taken unacceptable proportions. The people of Artsakh want to live freely and safely. But how did they experience the other people? For example, during the four-day war in 2016, during the military action, a group of military entered a house and murdered 3 very elderly civilians who were in their house and mutilated their bodies by cutting off their ears. How can any peace or even acceptable neighborly relations take place when the most basic security and respect towards the Armenians are lacking? Before we talk about exchange of territories, administrative solutions, or whatever, there has to be peaceful interaction between the two people. There should be cultural exchanges, musical concerts, sports competitions, etc., being organized in each country so that the Artsakhi people and the Azerbaijani learn to appreciate and respect one another. Of course, the borders should be open, people should be able to visit, and people should be able to feel the benefits of trade. Only when this has become a reality can meaningful peace negotiations take place. As everyone in this room probably is well aware, we are very far from that at this stage, but it's all the more important to start doing something about it. First, it is important to know what the situation is today so that we can understand what should be done. I would hope that the main purpose of this panel is not so much to point fingers, but to establish what the situation is today so that it can be addressed in a meaningful way. History is equally important. The difficult relations between the two countries is not new. It goes back at least 100 years. And it's not one of the least contradictions of the communist regime that while officially promoting international brotherhood, Soviet policies, because of their inherent injustice, actually encourage conflicts to boil beneath the surface. The result of history is what we see today. Azeris and Artsakis are neighbors. All these questions should be addressed so that with time, both people may come to one day benefit from peaceful relations. I'm sure the panel you will hear today will shed light on the present situation. A few words on the panelists you will hear today that I have the great pleasure to meet yesterday evening for the first time are in many respects ordinary people who by circumstances have been thrust on the world stage because of their own courage, their own moral compass, their own strength of character. And they have become heroes, which we can only admire and thank for their courage. The world is a better place because of people such as them. We have known the Nelson Mandelas or the Sakharovs. Well, now, Rajib Zarakolu and Alexander Lapshin are, in a way, their today's successors. I hope that this conference will shed light and that their action will inspire in the same way other people, and that we learn to live together on this earth in harmony and in peace, and seek out what unites us and not what divides us. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Gumshan. Very inspiring words indeed. As for the next speaker, I am sure that you don't need really introductions about who he is. We have the honor today, the great honor, to have with us in our panel of this conference the Speaker of the National Assembly of the Republic of Artsakh, Mr. Ashut Gulyan. You have the floor.
Բարի առավոտ բոլորին, հարգելի գործընկերներ, տիկնայք և պարոնայք, ինձ համար մեծ պատիվ է Եվրոպական խորհրդարանում ներկա գտնվել անչափ կարևոր հայատյացություն, պատմական և արդի դրսևորումները թեմայով կազմակերպված միջոցառման։ Որպես օրենսդիր և որպես Արցախի խորհրդարանի նախագահ առանձնակի կարևորում եմ այն հանգամանքը, որ մեր այսօրվա հանդիպումը տեղի ունենում հենց Եվրոպական միության խորհրդարանի շենքում, մի կառույց, որը ոչ միայն եվրոպական ընտանիքում ապրող ժողովուրդներին, այլև ամբողջ աշխարհի համար ժողովրդավարության, օրինականության և համերաշխության առաջամարտիկներից է։ Այս իմաստով պետք է արժանի մատուցել եվրոպական միջավայրում գործող կառավարական և հասարակական կազմակերպություններին, որոնց առօրյա աշխատանքը միտված է աշխարհում երկխոսության, փոխադարձ հարգանքի և խաղաղության հաստատման։ Առիթն օգտագործելով ուզում եմ շնորհակալություն հայտնել միջոցառման բոլոր կազմակերպիչներին, Եվրոպայի հայ դատի հանձնախմբին և Թուֆենկյան հիմնադրամին, ինչպես նաև Եվրոպական խորհրդարանի անդամ, Արցախի ժողովրդի մեծ բարեկամ Էլենի Թեախարուսին, մարդու, ում աշխատանքային գործունեությունը փաստում է վերոնշյալ արժեքների համար պայքարելու իր ազնվությունը։ Հարգելի գործընկերներ, Այլատյացությունը մեր ժամանակներում դարձել է մարդկությանը սպառնացող ամենամեծ մարտահրավերներից մեկը, որն իր ցանկացած դրսևորմամբ քայքայում է համագործակցության մթնոլորտը երկրագնդի տարբեր վայրերում։ Առավել վտանգավոր է, երբ այլատյացությունը և ատելության խոսքը վեր են ածվում պետական քաղաքականության, կարճաժամկետ և երկարաժամկետ հեռանկարներում կասկածի տակ դնելով ժողովուրդների խաղաղ գոյակցությունը։ Եվ չնայած միջազգային հանրության կողմից ձեռնարկվող քայլերին, միջազգային կառույցների կողմից ընդունվող իրավական փաստաթղթերին և դրանց իրագործման ուղղված գործնական քայլերին, դեռևս ամբողջությամբ չի հաջողում ներդնել այլատյացությանը հակազդելու արդյունավետ գործիքներ։ Այս համատեքստում հաջողության կարող ենք հասնել միայն այն ժամանակ, երբ բոլորի կողմից ընկալելի կլինի այն գիտակցումը, որ այլատյացությամբ թունավորված հանրությունը երբեք և ոչ մի պարագայում չի կարող հասարակական և համամարտկային արժեք ստեղծել։ Հակառակը, այլատյացություն սերմանողը ի վերջո հայտնվում է սեփական ձեռքերով կառուցված թակարդում։ Ցավոք պետք է նշեմ, որ որպես ժողովուրդ Արցախում, Հայաստանում և Սփյուռքում ապրող հայությունը ամեն օր բախվում է իր դեմ իրականացվող հայատյացության քաղաքականությանը, որը մշակվում և համակարգվում է ադրբեջանական իշխանությունների կողմից։ Այս երևույթը մեր հարևան երկրում նոր չէ։ Ավելին, սեփական ազգային ինքնությունը կերտելու ճանապարհին Ադրբեջանի կողմից հայատյացությունը դարձել է դրա անբաժան մաս։ Իսկ չկարգավորված հակամարտության պայմաններում Ադրբեջանի կողմից իշխանությունների կողմից օգտագործում է որպես սեփական ժողովրդին մոլորեցնելու ազդեցիկ գործիք։ Դեռևս 1988 թվականի հուլիսին Եվրոպական խորհրդարանը թեկուզ ուշացումով անդրադարձել է նույն տարվա փետրվարին Ադրբեջանի Սումգայիթ քաղաքում հայատյացության հստակ դրսևորմամբ իշխանությունների կողմից կազմակերպված և իրագործված հայ բնակչության ջարդին։ Բանաձևում խորհրդարանը դատապարտել է ադրբեջանական իշխանությունների հայ բնակչության կյանքին անմիջական սպառնացող գործողությունները և կոչ արել խորհրդային միության իշխանություններին օրենքի սահմաններում պատժել ջարդարարներին։ Օգտվելով խորհրդային պետության ոչ համարժեք հարձականքից և անպատժելիության մթնոլորտից, պաշտոնական Բաքուն հետագա տարիներին ևս շարունակել է իր հայատյաց վարքագիծը Բաքվում, Կիրովաբադում և մի շարք բնակավայրերում։ Իսկ 1991 թվականին վերջին լայնածավալ պատերազմ է սանձազերծել իր իրավունքների համար պայքարող Արցախի հայության դեմ։ Դժբախտաբար այսօր էլ շարունակում է նույն գիծը։ Հայատյացություն սերմանելով մանկապարտեզում, դպրոցում և այլ ուսումնական հաստատություններում, ատելության խոսք քարոզելով գիտական աշխատանքներում և մամուլում, հսկայական ռեսուրսներ ծախսելով օտարերկրյա պաշտոնական և ոչ պաշտոնական շրջանակներում, Ադրբեջանը փորձում է նենգափոխել իրականություն։ Այս թույլ տեղեկատվությանը հակազդելու համար մեր արտասահմանյան գործընկերներին խորհուրդ ենք տալիս այցելել Արցախ և տեղում ծանոթանալ իրավիճակին։ Շատ պարզ բանաձև է ընկած ադրբեջանա-ղարաբաղյան հակամարտության լուծման հիմքում։ Քանի դեռ դու հակառակորդի մեջ չես տեսնում ընդդիմախոսի, իսկ հեռանկարում նաև գործընկերոջ, շատ դժվար է, եթե ոչ անհնարին, կառուցել վստահության այնպիսի կամուրջ, որը կարող է վերականգնել հարևանությամբ ապրող ժողովուրդների միջև բարիդրացիական հարաբերությունները։ Համոզված եմ, որ այս պարզ ճշմարտությունը հասկանում են նաև մեր հարևան Ադրբեջանում, բայց այս դեպքում զարմանալի է, թե ում են ուղղված հակամարտության կարգավորումը ձգձգելու մասին նրանց մշտական բողոքներն ու դժգոհությունները։ Հարգելի ներկաներ, համոզված եմ, որ նման ձևաչափով կազմակերպված ցանկացած միջոցառում օգնում է մեզ բացահայտելու համամարտկային զարգացմանը խոչընդոտող երևույթների էությունը և համատեղ ջանքերով փնտրելու ու գտնելու ելքեր ցանկացած բարդ իրավիճակից։ Ուստի կրկին ողջունելով միջոցառման բոլոր մասնակիցներին, մաղթում եմ բոլորիս օգտակար քննարկումներ։ Շնորհակալություն։
Thank you very much. who are with us today are people who are deeply committed with values and principles and deep belief to justice and democracy. But today we have the honor to have a very, very special person with us, and this person is Mr. Ragip Zarakolu. He's a Turkish human rights activist and publisher who for many years has been fighting for freedom and expression in Turkey. At the end of the 70s, he established the publishing house Belge, which for decades published books with sensitive subjects in the Turkish society, such as the Armenian genocide, for example, human and minority rights. Mr. Zarakolu has been subjected to politically motivated persecutions for the publishing activities of Belge. In 2007, he received International Association of Genocide Scholars Award. And in 2012, Mr. Zarakolu was nominated for the Nobel Prize by the Swedish Parliament. So for all these activities, commitments, and struggles, we have the honor today to receive Mr. Zarakolu in order to have a small honoring ceremony on behalf of the President of the European Armenian Federation for Justice and Democracy, Mr. Kaspar Karabekian.
Please.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I would like to give the floor to my colleague, to my dear colleague, EAFDJ, who's going to moderate the panel from now on. Thank you very much.
I would like to invite our distinguished guest speakers to the panel, Mr. Oshetsky, Mr. Zarakolu, Mr. Lapshin, and of course, Mr. Melikan and Mr. Melikan, please. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, everyone. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We have an interesting program today with 5 outstanding speakers who will elaborate on the phenomenon of Armenophobia, in other words, anti-Armenian sentiment or anti-Armenianism from different perspectives, from the academic point of view, from the standpoint of human rights, and based on eyewitness accounts, that is, concrete examples of its manifestation. If we were to give a very simple definition of anti-Armenian sentiment, we would say that it is a hostility or prejudice towards Armenians, Armenia, and Armenian culture. This can range from strong negative stereotypes, individual hatred, to institutionalized persecution. Historically, the Armenian genocide, the anti-Armenian sentiment certainly reached its peak during the Armenian genocide, a fact that has been recognized and condemned by numerous countries. Nevertheless, the Turkish authorities have persistently refused and unfortunately still refuse to deal with the past in an open and honest manner and allow a genuine public discourse on it. Contemporary Armenophobia is usually expressed by opposition to the actions or the right to existence of Armenia, aggressive denial of the Armenian genocide, or belief in and promotion of various conspiracy theories, mostly to manipulate public opinion for political gain. Credit for this, the last definition, goes to Thomas de Waal. So the conference is therefore an attempt to have a more holistic picture of the phenomenon. It is an attempt to analyze the historical context, the roots of the phenomenon, its past and current forms of manifestation, as well as the significance and the possible means of combating it. Given the prevalence, the intensity, and the inherent danger of anti-Armenian sentiment, the conference will focus on the analysis of anti-Armenian sentiment in two countries, in Turkey and Azerbaijan. But considering the depth of the issue and the time restriction, it will certainly be difficult to cover all the aspects and give an exhaustive answer to all the questions. The goal, however, is to create a platform today for an open discussion, first and foremost, and to raise awareness. Having said this, I would already like to give the floor to our distinguished guest speakers. And the first guest speaker is Mr. Ragit Zarakolu. I feel extremely privileged to present him. A lot has already been said about him, and of course you can speak a lot, but I would like to say that for anyone, Mr. Zarakolu is certainly well known to anyone who has been following the struggle for human rights, for the freedom of expression of a group of Turkish intellectuals and activists in the past decades. Mr. Zarakolu will elaborate on Armenophobia in the collective consciousness in Turkey, motives and manifestations. The floor is yours, Mr. Zarakolu.
I'm very happy to be with you here to discuss a poison of Armenophobia. Armenophobia, some aspects, looks like anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism in Turkey became popular with growing radical Islamist ideology in Turkey. Before it was not so strong. But Armenophobia was always strong in Turkish history. Partly it was forgotten in the world also, the Armenian genocide reality. And at the time there was no need to a strong Armenophobia. But when the discussions began after 1965 in Yerevan, 50 years of the Armenian genocide, Armenophobia became growing and growing in Turkey, unfortunately. And it became a part of also governments the ministers can easily use very ugly Armenophobic definitions. For example, Burhan Kuzu is responsible from the constitution from the government, and he told in Turkish, for example, gebertilen teröristlerin muayenesi mutlaka yapılmalıdır, görülecektir ki önemli bir bölümü sünnetsiz. Uyan Kürt kardeşim, ne olur uyan artık. This is Armenophobic discourse taking forward for the Kurds. In many times, the Kurds define who search for their rights in Turkey. They were accused as Armenian origin. So the Kurds are free to be from that so-called crime to ask basic rights. You know, Hrant Dink, my friend, he used also a term of poison. He means that kind racistic and racistic ideas are a poison for everybody. And he didn't talk about this poison about the Turks, but the authorities accepted this defaming of Turkishness, and he was convicted because of he used poison. But I believe really Armenophobia is a poison for Turkish society and a threat, and we must give a struggle against this. But the feeling, Armenophobic feeling, have a very long history in Turkey, and it began with especially after the Balkanic War. After the at the end of Balkanic War, Trotsky, he was a war correspondent during the Balkanic War, visited some people at the hospital. Everybody was very happy because of the Ottoman period finish in the Balkans. But there were some Armenian volunteers, and they were not happy. And Trotsky asked him, why you are not so happy? Look at, you won. And the reply of the Armenian volunteer was, we will pay the bill after 1930. Because of the international aura at that time, 1914, Turkish government accepted so-called Armenian reform. In 1914, with the pressure of that time Russia, also Turkish good friend Germany was also a part of Armenian reform, so-called. But could you believe, after reform, 1 year later, it became an international agreement, a genocide could be possible. Armenians, the main reason of the genocide to prevent self-determination of the Armenians. And partly it became successful for Western Armenia because they annihilate all Armenian people with the genocide. And it became a very bad example for future of Europe also. It gave courage to the Holocaust, as Raphael Lemkin told us. Armenia, Western and Eastern Armenia, was an obstacle that time's pan-Turkic ideology. It was also an ideological reason for genocide, to annihilate Armenian people between so-called pan-Turkic imagination of the empire. And this ideology, pan-Turkic ideology, is very effective in Azerbaijan. And one of the reasons, the growing Armenophobia in Azerbaijan is reality. Azerbaijan, it is a right for Azerbaijan, self-determination, but it is not a right for Karabakh. So the Karabakh decided also self-determination, and the world must respect this, because they were their homeland, historical homeland, and they have a majority. Also, the Azeri people living in Karabakh, they decided not attend the voting for Plebiscite for self-determination. And so this is the base of Armenian, and it is really legitimate to use their self-determination right. If Azerbaijan used self-determination right, if the contract with Soviet Union finished, so it finished for Karabakh. But unfortunately, in this world, Karabakh is shamefully lived alone. I'm very proud to visit Karabakh in 2013 and to feel the aura of freedom and the aura of struggle for freedom. The first time Armenians succeed to save themselves from a genocide, from a new genocide, and Azerbaijan had no any other plan than genocide. Their plan, we know from Samgoy, from Baku, and we know these stories from 1905 also. The massacre. Baku was also an Armenian city, the capital of Azerbaijan. What happened to Armenian community in Baku? I work a lot for Armenian-Turkish dialogue, but real dialogue. We define this people's diplomacy. We don't need state diplomacy based on interest, based on treasons, and I believe this is more successful. 2000, we organized a pan-Turkish Armenian dialogue meeting under the deck of French Senate. And after this panel, France accepted, because before the assembly always accepted the parliament the truth of the genocide, but always Turkey was successful to prevent it at the Senate. And Senate accepted 2000 the Armenian genocide truth first time. But what was the reaction of Turkish government that time? It was something like of alarming. And then that time the government, the coalition government, was Bülent Ecevit and Devlet Bahçeli. You know, Devlet Bahçeli, well, he had also pan-Turkic ideology, and he's also a part of the government today. And they decided to make denial, to leave the silence, and to pass to counter-attack by funding a special committee, so-called claims of genocide, struggle with so-called genocide claims. And it became a part of Turkish national security top level. So the poison make widen with funding of this special commissioner of the National Security Council, Hasim Kaka, we call it. And you must notice it is not a so-called Armenian genocide, it is genocide claims. So because there were not only Armenians, the Assyrians and the Greeks were the victim of the genocide after 1915. And under this committee work, they organized seminars for diplomats, for bureaucrats, for imams, and they send for universities and also for the schools. And it became later a scandal because Turkish army made a CD, a denial of genocide, and they sent this to Armenian schools also, 2007 or 6, as I remember. So the Armenophobia became a kind of institutional, state institutional. After that, Armenophobia, after founding, and the first chair was Devlet Bahçeli, and later generally the foreign ministers became the chair, and this committee dissolved silently, I think 2013 or 14. But the poison was enough, I think they thought, they called so. Before there was silence, I thought, but they give poison in Turkey young generations as a state policy, and it is not acceptable. There is also psychological reasons for the Armenophobia. And the history of this Armenophobia went back on 100 years before, because after the constitutional revolution, Armenians were so good organized, and also their schools, also the colleges, everywhere. So it was a kind of jealousness for growing building of Turkish nationalism. And also another psychological effect, everybody knows this is unacceptable crime. So this is a kind of also under consciousness to feel guilty. But they cover this guiltiness by to be aggressive, and this is worse. Before, as the president of Armenia told, before the forgiveness, first we must accept the truth and apologize. It's impossible to build up a real Turkish-Armenian relation before to accept the truth and prevent the poison. Thank you. Shino
Thank you, Mr. Tarakolu. Thank you for presenting the subject in such a broad context, for exposing the links between different manifestations of this phenomenon. Truly eye-opening. It is a pleasure for me to introduce our next guest speaker, Dr. Jakub Osiecki, historian, Armenologist, and researcher at Jagiellonian University in Krakow, Poland. Thanks to a small group of very devoted scientists, including Mr. Osiecki, the University of Krakow has become a very vibrant center of Armenian studies in Poland and in Europe. So thank you for this, Mr. Osiecki. Dr. Osiecki co-authored several books on the history of the Armenian community in Poland, as well as on the Catholic minority of Armenia and Georgia, and led a project that attempted to register the collective memory of the Armenian society. Besides his scientific activities, Dr. Osiecki also carried out various social projects in Armenia. He will elaborate on the historical and political context of Armenophobia in Azerbaijan. The floor is yours, Mr. Orsetsky.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen and dear organizers, thank you for the invitation. I will try to, I hope this presentation, maybe not for the Armenians, right, but for the Europeans here in the very center of the Europe, will be somehow revealing, will, as Fahina said, will open our eyes a little bit on this issue of Armenophobia. Because we, let's say, we live in peace, right, here in Europe. And I would like to commence with the famous formula of Leo Tolstoy from the Anna Karenina, that all peaceful countries are alike. But every country in conflict is unhappy in its own way. So maybe that will help us a little bit to understand the situation of Armenians from Artsakh. In order to find the sources or to acquire the historical background of for Armenophobia in the South Caucasus, especially in Azerbaijan, we must venture to the 19th century and early 20th century for a while. This seems necessary if we are acquired a coherent image of the perception of the Armenians by, as we call them in the 19th century and beginning of 20th century, Tatars, the Muslim community, which is quite important, which since the 30s of the 20th century began to refer to the Azerbaijani community. In the 19th century, the South Caucasus was visited by a number of foreigners, travelers, missionaries, and also Poles frequently visited the Caucasus, and they left diaries and the minor notes which documented their journeys. At this point, I will adduce a number of relations in which the authors mention Armenians and in which they frequently describe them, making reference to the current opinions of the nation population, or just common rumors. This will enable us to acquire a certain image of the attitude, the opinion of the Tatar people about the Armenians. In 1828, after the end of the Perso-Russian conflict, one of the largest stages of the Russian conquest of the Caucasus, in the result of which basically the entire area of the Transcaucasia became a part of the empire of the Romanov dynasty. In 1830, the region was visited by Henry Martin. He was the Protestant missionary who operated mostly in Persia, but also visited areas located to the north of the Arax River. During one of such journeys, he visited the lands of the present-day Azerbaijan and Armenia. His destinations included Echmedzin and Yerevan were on his trip. So when he was heading to Echmedzin and to Yerevan to visit the Catholicos of all Armenians. He describes the journey as extremely sacred, and the area which he covered as one of the free of the ethnic and the religious conflicts. He draws attention to the letters which were issued for him by the Catholicos, as I said, in Persian and Armenian language, which, as he mentioned, in many cases enabled one to avoid unnecessary delays or commotion. In the book entitled Researchers in Armenia, published in Boston in 1813, the authors Smith and White expressed an equal positive opinion about the area of the Zangezur, Karabakh, Artsakh. According to their descriptions, Shusha is supposed to be the place of the beautiful topography, and the population of the city was thought to present the extremely peaceful attitude. At that time, Shusha flourished in terms of the activities of the Catholic, Protestant, or broadly speaking, educational missions. As it was mentioned by the Smith and White, one of the pioneers of the institutions for the popular education, without division into religions or ethnicity, was a Pole, Felicen Zaremba. So somehow I'm proud of it. In 1854, saw a publication of the Baron Mauthausen work entitled Transcaucasia, Sketches of the Nation and Races Between the Black Sea and the Caspian. As he explored the Caucasus, the author mentions the peaceful coexistence of the Armenians and the Tatar people, which is attested by many conversations that he held. The only point upon both Christians and Armenians and Georgians and Mahomedans, the Tatar people, are agreed, had to do with the excessive financial tax-related oppression on the part of the organs of the Russian state. These few descriptions furnish confirmation of the mentioned already today, the Thomas de Waal thesis, the author of the book entitled Black Garden, published by the New York University Press. Therefore, perhaps the most popular publication devoted to the Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict now, the author claimed that the history of the struggle for Karabakh and, let's say, this anti-Armenian attitude is no longer than 100 years. But let us now discuss the memoirs written by the Polish travelers, whose are, let's say, more poetic descriptions provided slightly more information about the situation, ethnic situation in this region, especially about the attitudes of the Armenians in the late 19th century. Traveling to Transcaucasia, Artur List describes the phenomenon of caravanas, which drew from east to the west and from the north to the south. As he describes as such caravans, he mentioned that the less arba, or just in English, the car, is always driven by Armenian, a merchant. List called him a Caucasian Jew, who never charges these cars, the arabas, and who never drives oxen. And for manual labor, it's not for him. He engages in intellectual labor, and he provides money to enterprises, which is a source of envy among many. Therefore, we are not dealing with the conflict now or any anti-Armenian aggression, but with this envy, a feeling of the social injustice for which some Armenians were indirectly responsible. In 1860, Michał Andrzejkowicz described the peoples and the customs of the South and the North Caucasus in 2 volumes. When he discusses the Armenians, he uses the language of the local people, as he was saying, the language of the majority. Therefore, the text features some wrongful terms, as the crafty Armenian, cunning Armenian, the one who dominates trade, who exercises complete control over the trade in the Caucasus. All these expressions are related to the Armenian traders. Andrzejkowicz wrote those. There are lots of Armenians in Transcaucasian land. Some live in villages, they are engaged in agriculture, others are engaged in trade in cities. Armenians keep to their religion, but as far as the customs and the morals are concerned, they always adopt the ones which are prevalent in their country of residence. They assimilate easily. As he wrote aside, a fellow countrymen, but strangers instead. He writes that saying that the disseminate new falsehood by old words applies to the Armenians. So they are just trying to solve bad things, saying that this is doing something new. Therefore, the image of the Armenian was usually associated with the one who was a merchant, a person of the influence, somehow riches, the person who was better off, the one who frequently used his status, the image of the one who is an administrator or who is at least working class. By the way, when we look closer to at the Polish Armenians and their further gradual flourishing in the community of Lvov, in the Kingdom of Poland, which has many easily infer continued to be a source, of course, of the growing envy among Poles, you will find some similarities. Polish Armenians, merchants from Lvov, lived in rather peaceful society, but sometimes were objects of the anti-Armenian tendencies. Let us emphasize that even though there was a handful of Armenians not only in Lvov, but the entire Kingdom of Poland, and their business-related and efficient self-government skills were noticed in the remote city of Krakow. Some Poles, allegedly claimed in reference to Lvov that this is the part of Poland occupied by Armenians. It was called the Partim Polonian Occupant Armenia. Poles and Germans, which were a majority in the city of Lvov in the 17th century, wishing not to lose the privileged position, were trying to implement some repressions toward Armenians, such as ban of importing commodities, a ban of trade in the suburbs of Lvov. Sadly speaking, we have in our history of Poland, unfortunately, also example of the physical repressions toward Armenians. After one of the kind of events in the 16th century, Polish Armenian Tufenkian was killed by the Poles. It needs to be underlined that he died in some misty circumstances, but without no doubt, Tufenkian's trade-related capabilities, expertise, was a source of the common jealousy. Tufenkian, the son of Tufenkian, turned to the Polish king, Zygmunt Stary, for help. Due to his intervention, the royal court and the mayor of the city of Lvov and the representatives of the municipal council were imprisoned and fined because they did nothing to prevent tragedy. That kind of action, of course, they were not possible on a South Caucasus in the 19th century. But let us return to the main topic. The stereotypical opinions about the estate and the property of the Armenians, or in Poland or on South Caucasus, were met with the favorable conditions at the turn of the 20th century. It was when Armenians, after the massacres in Adana in Turkey, began to express more vocal demand for reform, representativeness, autonomy, and also for the Armenian question of independent state became more vivid and unifying the lands of the eastern and western Armenia. This generated ill feeling on the part of the Tatar people who were less organized. Unfortunately, we have to be reminded that on the other hand, we meet this opinion about the Tatar people who somehow were less organized and well prepared for the new times and the growing popularity of nationalism in that time. Unfortunately, the stereotype of the Armenian, the one who was a cunning, crafty merchant, also affected the imagination of the Tsarist administration, which adopted to confiscate the entire estate of the Armenian church, the property of the Armenian church. Those leading credence to then current opinions entirely by the Muslims. In 1897, Golitsyn, like the governor of the region of the South Caucasus, he was the governor of the whole South Caucasus. He was known mainly due to his anti-Armenian views. He was appointed with the task of confiscating the estate of the Armenian Apostolic Church in 1903. Those values estimated to be 1 million of rubles, but in reality, it was calculated to be 100,000 of rubles. The turn of the 20th century is significant for a number of reasons. Firstly, it seems that there was a top-down acquiescence which enabled one to criticize, blame, or vilify the Armenians and the church for social, political, religious activities, or above all, for their presumably inherent ethnic properties, which is a clear manifestation of xenophobia. The revolution of 905 gave vent to these attitudes. In 905, Polish journalists in a newspaper, Kraj, translated as a state, as a country, wrote that we received grim news from Baku. The Tatar people declared a formal war against the Armenians on the streets. Bigi Eybat, the district of Baku, is burning. The reason for the clash was associated with the fact that two soldiers of the Armenian region escorted a criminal, a Tatar person, to a prison. A criminal attempted to run away. The soldiers used their weapons and they wounded injured the fugitive, but the rumor spread among the Mohammedan, the Tatar, that the soldier killed him. So, in fact, on the next day, 35 people died, the Armenians, on the first day of this revolt. In the course of the few days, as a result of an intensification of the violence, massacres also struck the Shusha and Nakhichevan. Initially, the journalists, who are not familiar with the situation in the Caucasus, sought analogies with the events which occurred a few years before the Ottoman Empire. It is difficult to say what is happening in the Caucasus right now, he wrote. Wojciech Spasowicz, one of the Polish journalists in that time present in Baku. We know that the Tatar people in Baku took arms and they declared the war against the Armenians. It would seem that it's an ethnic and a religious dispute, but at the same time, reliable sources tell us that we are not dealing with the ordinary ethnic dispute. In the interview with the governor of Baku, General Fadiev, anti-Armenian ill feeling which had been harbored for the period of time manifested itself, and they were unlikely to be founded in a reality, but they were rooted in the common superstitions. The Armenians are to be blamed for everything, he said. And especially the Armenian intellectuals, particularly responsible for the attributed to the representatives of the Technical Association of Baku, whose members were predominantly Armenian. It is obvious that the Tatar people were angry that Christians commonly received, as he said, a wage of 1 ruble in mines and the factories, whereas the Mohammedans received 70 kopek. The Armenians were to be blamed for this because among those ranks there are accountants and the clerks in, as I said, factories and mines. These accusations manifest about an old anti-Armenian attitude popular among the Mohammedan community of Baku. They were popular among the Mohammedan community of Baku in Azerbaijan. As I said, the revolution 905 was only a pretext to give the vent to the anti-Armenian sentiments. Even if the entire Russia, the revolution of 905 was mainly socialist working class in nature, in the Caucasus it assumed the nature of the anti-Armenian activities. The Armenians were considered to be the ethnic group which was responsible for the social inequality in the Caucasus. It's worthwhile to remark that in the period, Imperial Russia did nothing to resist these opinions and activities. Moreover, there are archived documents from archive from which we may infer that it was convenient for Russians, for Tsar, to choose Armenians as their main opponent instead of the Tsar and the Tsar's administration. The sentiments, anti-Armenian sentiments, according to some researchers, were deliberately formed by the Okhrana, this is the Russian political police, which led past to the censorship of certain patently anti-Armenian materials in the mass media. Anti-Armenian sentiment was also sensed by one of the old men, one from the noble family, later emphasized the following in the interview. For some time it was obvious that disaster was inevitable. The struggle for jobs reached the extreme state and anti-Armenian agitation prevailed. The Tsarist ukaz issued on the 17th of October was supposed to solve the conflict. Russia entered the fray when the seeds of the conflict were sown and the Cossack units basically had no one to drive away. Armenians reckoned that the proclamation issued on the 17th of October would give them a certain additional rights, or that it would, let's say, give them part of autonomy in the Russian Empire, where they could feel safer than in Ottoman Empire. But there was nothing more remote from the truth. Armenian people feared above all the Tatar people. They considered Russians to be their allies. They reckoned that the anti-Armenian sentiment of Mohammedans, Tatars in the Caucasus could be nullified by the iron fist of the Tsar. However, nothing was done in this respect, and the increasingly weaker empire of Romans was basically coming to ruin. Russia did not turn out to be interested in ensuring security in 905, in 1980, when it withdrew its army from the Caucasus, leaving the Armenians at the mercy of the pan-Islamic ideology and propaganda, which patently called for the unification of all Turkic tribes, and the Armenians were considered to be a main obstacle. We have to bear in mind that not only the Russian, the Tsarist administration made a few, let's say, major mistakes in the terms of Armenophobia and dealing with this question. We have to understand that also the British, who are maybe even more better informed about the situation on Middle East and on South Caucasus, and they interpreted social attitudes and the aggressive nature of the Tatar ethnos in combination with the Turkish one toward the Armenians, but they also did nothing in this manner. And in 1918, British units landed in Transcaucasia and in Baku. British troops were cooperating with the Armenian self-defense forces during the siege of Baku, and Armenian volunteer army captured the city. In the next few months, gave the governance of the city to the British Commander General Major Dunsterville. Unfortunately, after a few months of the administrating Baku, the British decided to withdraw. Straight after the withdrawal of the British forces, Azeri-Turkish insurrection started, during which almost 20,000 Armenian civilians died. In July, in 1920, Dr. John Elder from the American Relief on Yerevan wrote to the Bishop of Canterbury, "This is one of the most tragic moments in the history of Great Britain. General Dunsterville does not have a right to call himself a gentleman, and every British should be ashamed of what he has done." The British were unofficially blamed for the Armenian massacres in Baku. Right after that, when British commanders decided to withdraw troops, the massacres of Armenian civilians started. A few months later, another major player on the South Caucasus appeared on this in its history. The Bolsheviks took power in Armenia on the 2nd of December 1920. According to agreement signed by the Boris Legrand and General Dron, Armenia became independent socialistic state, and the power was placed in the hands of the Revcom, Revolutionary Committee. Bolsheviks guaranteed former members of the social nationalistic government of Armenia that no repressive measures were to be carried out against them, and the tensions between the Armenian and the Tatars will be solved. But we have to admit again, none of these promises were fulfilled. On the 3rd of July 1921, in the telegram signed by Ordzhonikidze, we read, "We strongly recommend to Georgian, Armenian, Azerbaijani Cheka, like secret Bolsheviks policy, without delay the liquidation of all leaders of the counter-revolutionary organizations." The central bone of contention was, of course, in that time, Artsakh was allocated to Azerbaijan officially because of the economical reasons. The better railway connection, road connection with the more developed regions and cities in Soviet Azerbaijan, such as Baku. But of course, it did not solve the problem at all. Repeating the slogans that in the name of the brotherhood of the nations, the issue of Armenophobia in the Soviet Union disappeared is of course nonsense. Armenians from Karabakh, from Artsakh, were writing letters in 1945, 65, 77, and after the perestroika only in the first months of the new policy of the Nikolai Gorbachev, Central Committee received more than 200 letters from Armenians living in that time in the Soviet Republic of Azerbaijan. All these letters were ignored by the communists, and in 1988, Armenian-Azerbaijan quarrel was the first stone in the avalanche of ethno-territorial disputes that swept away the Soviet Empire. In the 90s, when the Soviet Union ended the wars, Nagorno-Karabakh was shorthand for the awkward conflict fought by the exotic people somewhere somewhere in the world. Many Western observers sought to define it as a frozen by Soviets ethno-religious conflict, but it is simplification of what had happened on the South Caucasus in the last 200 years. Now, of course, the heat has gone out of the Armenian-Azeri conflict, and it's frozen again. But it cannot be ignored. It's not exotic and it's not remote, we have to bear in mind. It's a tiny knot at the center of the big international security table. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Orszewski, for this very insightful and thorough throwback into history. It gives a lot of food for thought and highly interesting, and it reminds once again how important history is, how fascinating it is, and how important it is to know and draw the corresponding conclusions. I certainly noticed some of the authors that you mentioned, and I'm going to come back to you for more reading afterwards. I'm thrilled to introduce our next guest speakers, two human rights defenders from the Republic of Artsakh in Nagorno-Karabakh, Mr. Ruben Melikian and Mr. Artak Beglarian, who actively contributed and still contribute to strengthening the rule of law in Artsakh and have an excellent insight into the developments in the country. Mr. Artak Beglarian has been elected as Human Rights Defender of the Republic of Artsakh in October 2018. Previously, he held the post of the head of department at the same institution. In the period of 2012 until 2018, Mr. Beglarian served as assistant, then press secretary and advisor to the Prime Minister of the Republic of Artsakh. Mr. Beglarian is a representative of the young generation in Artsakh, where unfortunately the war unleashed by Azerbaijan had to be part of the childhood and thus part of their daily reality. This, however, did not prevent him from studying in some of the excellent universities in Europe, in the USA, including the Fletcher School of Law, Diplomacy at Tufts University. And just one personal detail, if I may add, Mr. Beglarian also has accomplished something that is a dream for many Armenians and aspiring alpinists, namely he climbed Mount Ararat. Mr. Ruben Melikian is a co-founder of a recently created human rights NGO, Path of Law, and the former ombudsman, that is Human Rights Defender of Artsakh. He held this post for 2 years until October 2018. Prior to that, Mr. Melikian held senior posts such as Rector of Armenian Academy of Justice and Deputy Minister of Justice of Armenia. Being the Human Rights Defender of Artsakh at the time, Mr. Melikian and his team carried out extensive work to compile the report on the atrocities and war crimes committed by the Azerbaijani army during the April War 2016. The report will be presented today as well. So I would first like to give the floor to Mr. Beglarian, who will elaborate on the Azerbaijani policy of Armenophobia, its repercussions on human rights and conflict resolution.
Thank you. Thank you. Honorable Speaker of the National Assembly of the Artsakh Republic, Mr. Ruben, honorable members of the European Parliament, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, as the Human Rights Ombudsman of the Republic of Artsakh, I'm going to present some cases and some manifestations of the Armenophobia policy in Azerbaijan. That policy, especially in the recent 15 years, has been intensified, and it's not noticeable, probably I would say, since 2003, 2004, the intensification. But the densest and the strongest example of Armenophobia is actually war in this last decade, in 2016, where we notice and we recorded many war crimes and many other examples of Armenophobia, both statements and actions, both in military and other spheres of Azerbaijan. I will present those facts with presentation, and Anna probably will help us to change the slides. In 2016, on April 2nd, Azerbaijan started an offensive against Artsakh, and the ombudsman of Artsakh, Yuri Hayrapetyan, it's the slide second. Yuri Hayrapetyan made a statement condemning both the offensive and the war crimes which were recorded during just at the beginning during these military activities. And then Yuri Hayrapetyan made a report, short report, presenting the main war crimes and atrocities made by Azerbaijani forces. Slide 3 on that, please. Later, in December of 2016, Ombudsman of Artsakh, Ruben Melikian, who is here, presented the final report and larger report on Azerbaijani atrocities during the April War, and pay much more attention on war crimes against both combatants and civilians of the Artsakh Republic. Next slide, and then please, slide 4. The main findings of the report on war crimes were especially the following: that over 90% of combatants and civilians who fell under control of the Azerbaijani armed forces were tortured, executed, or mutilated. The war crimes were committed in all three areas where Azerbaijan had a control in Artsakh Republic against civilians and combatants of Artsakh. And the war crimes had a systematic and well-organized nature. Next slide, brief one. During the escalation, during this war, on April 2, 3 of combatants, military servicemen of Artsakh Republic, the names are shown there, were beheaded by Azerbaijani soldiers. And later, a few days later, pictures of the Azerbaijani soldier who beheaded Karam Sloyan, one of those priests. The pictures had been surfaced in social media of Azerbaijan, and the media of Azerbaijan spread them. Next one on the 6th one. At the beginning of the military activities on April 2nd, Azerbaijan shelled Martuni school and killed 12 years old Barsha Grigoryan, and 4 of his friends have been wounded. And actually, I guess it's not accidental that the shelling of the school started during the class time, over 9 a.m. or something like that, around that. And this fact also speaks about the intention of targeting civilian and public objects. Next one. In Talish village, which fell under control of the Azerbaijani armed forces, Azerbaijani soldiers murdered Valery Kalafyan and his wife. And also they murdered Valery Kalafyan mother, 92 years old mother. And all of them have been tortured and mutilated and their ears cut off. This is an example of a straight example of Armenophobia, because actually those civilians, at least 92 years old women, cannot be dangerous for Azerbaijani soldiers, and also their bodies cannot be dangerous when they cut off the ears of the killed civilians. And another example was that I missed this slide. That on April 10, just a minute. On April 10, 18 bodies of the Armenian soldiers who were under control of Azerbaijani armed forces just returned to the Artsakh authorities with the presence of ICRC and OSCE representatives, and all of them had signs of mutilation. And it's also a serious example that Azerbaijani armed forces had a purpose and intention to mutilate and to torture the Armenian soldiers, not only civilians. Slide 9, Anna, please. Then, after these crimes, committing the crimes, it's very important to stress that the Azerbaijani authorities awarded and encouraged the perpetrators of the war crimes. And an example of that is that the soldier, Azerbaijani soldier, who decapitated Sloyan, he awarded and heroized publicly this soldier. Aliyev, president of Azerbaijan, Aliyev awarded. The next slide, slide 10, shows that civilian objects were under shelling and were targeted by Azerbaijani forces. And you will see the numbers, what kind of civilian objects and what kind of property were damaged. Both schools, kindergartens, administrative buildings, private property, infrastructures, etc. And targeting schools and kindergartens are symbolic for us that the Azerbaijani armed forces target children, kids. Slide 11 shows that on April 4, when the Azerbaijani armed forces had some difficulties on the front line, the Minister of Defense, Zakir Hasanov of Azerbaijan, ordered publicly to his forces to be ready for destructive strikes by all means, including rocket systems, to Stepanakert and other territories. And Stepanakert is capital city of Artsakh. It means that he publicly ordered to strike the civilian population of Artsakh with rocket systems. Next slide shows that the Azerbaijani armed forces used 3 rocket systems, 2 Tufenkian systems, 2 Armenophobia systems, and 2 resurgence systems. And cluster munitions, some weapons and rocket systems which had cluster munitions. At least two types of cluster munitions used during the war, but there are some proofs which say that more than two types of cluster munitions were used. And later, in the following days, Hello Trust and the Artsakh Emergency Service found hundreds of cluster munitions in civilian populated areas of Artsakh. And we know that cluster munitions are banned with international convention. The Azerbaijani armed forces used also Smerch and some other rocket systems, but the strongest one was Smerch. And they used also the type of Smerch which has cluster munition. And also Azerbaijani armed forces used suicide drones, which are not now under control and under regulation of international law. And they use that with explosives, and they striked an Armenian bus carrying Armenian volunteer soldiers, and they killed 7 of those soldiers. And some other incidents were recorded with suicide drones, and the Armenian armed forces, the Artsakh armed forces had some human losses. Those examples of war crimes show that the actual war was well organized, well planned by the Azerbaijani forces. And also they had intention to kill Armenians and to make all Armenians have fear with Azerbaijani, from Azerbaijani armed forces. And also that's why, based on our analysis, those examples show that that's why they beheaded, mutilated, tortured, etc. The Armenian civilians and combatants. And there is another serious example, manifestation of Armenophobia. Probably many of you know about Safarov case. When it, on the please next slide. Slide 15. When in 2004, Safarov, an Azerbaijani officer, asked Armenian officer Gurgem Arkayan during his sleep in a hotel in Budapest, when both of them were taking part in NATO seminar, Partnership for Peace. But after that, the Azerbaijani officials and media praised this action, and there are some examples when, for example, the Ombudsman of Azerbaijan stated that Safarov should be an example for all Azerbaijani youth. But after all, in 2012, when Safarov was extradited to Azerbaijan, immediately after that, Ilham Aliyev, president of Azerbaijan, pardoned him and heroized him. And there is also a quote by the representative of the presidential office of Azerbaijan. On the next slide, the quote is there, slide 16. slide 17, just as a conclusion, all those war crimes and other manifestations of Armenophobia in military sphere shows that there is a serious danger for all Armenians, not only combatants and civilians in Artsakh, but also all Armenians, because many examples, many proofs show that Armenophobia lie in the society of Azerbaijan in all spheres and at all levels. Both European and US human rights relating committees several times alarmed about the consequences and the risks of Armenophobia in Azerbaijan. And we record continuous violations of human rights of Artsakh people especially, in education, in freedom of movement, in social economic rights, etc. We record continuous threats to some fundamental rights of Armenians and especially Artsakh population, including right to life, right to security, etc. I would stress that there is zero communication with Azerbaijanis, but if we want peace, lasting peace, we need communication between two societies. But in this situation, in this condition, we can't imagine any kind of peace and any kind of extensive communication between two societies, because this level of Armenophobia in the society of Azerbaijan is very scary for us, and it's very dangerous to have extensive communication between us. But for sure, we need confidence-building measures if we want peace. And the last slide, there is a specific report on Armenophobia. In 2018, September, my predecessor, Ruben Melikian, the Ombudsman of Artsakh, published a report on Armenophobia, showing and classifying all the examples and proofs on Armenophobia in Azerbaijan in all spheres and at all levels, with certain sources and citations. There are some examples here, and there is electronic version on internet. If you want, you can find all the examples. And Mr. Melikian will show you some examples of that report of Armenophobia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Beglarian. Before commenting, I would like to immediately pass the floor to Mr. Melikian, since your contributions are very closely connected. The floor is yours, Mr. Melikian, please.
And not only contributions are closely connected. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, the organizers, member of the European Parliament, Dr. Harus, all the organizers, the European Armenian Federation for Justice, and I always forget the last word of your organization. Democracy, yes. Yeah, and Tufenkian organization. Thank all the organizers, and I'd like to thank everybody here with different points of view. I'm sure, I think that this kind of fora are very important to at least start a process of dialogue. At least try to find out ways of starting the process of dialogue, because everything we are trying to put here are not only the information, the findings that are aimed to prove something, but they also are facts and findings that can start a process, because I totally agree with several speakers today, including Honorable Speaker of Parliament of Artsakh, that we cannot avoid one day starting that dialogue, and we need to always think about that future dialogue. It can be our generation, it can be our children's generation, it can be our grandchildren's generation, but we need to do that. That's unavoidable. So what I am going to present, as Mr. Beglarian already announced, is the last report of Artsakh Human Rights Ombudsman's Office, which was published in September 2018, which tries to find out the roots of the problem and to find out where we need to focus our attention in order to cure the situation. And now I'm going to present the two main points, two main areas, although the report is not only about that areas, which are media and education. Why these two areas? Because media is a short-term area where you can do anything, and by political impact, by the politically directed propaganda. And education is long-term issue when years and years and years you can bring a situation that any fear, any hatred can become an integral part of youth. And when it becomes an integral part of youth, it's already a very dangerous alarm is there. So unfortunately, we need to demonstrate now that both in media, short term, and in education, long term, we have that very dangerous situation in Azerbaijani society. And without that situation in Azerbaijani society, we, I'm sure, couldn't have had that terrible atrocities in 2016 and many other things, including Prime Minister Farah's case and so on and so forth. So the report was named Armenophobia in Azerbaijan, organized hate speech and animosity towards Armenians. It's not just hate speech. Hate speeches are always, unfortunately, it's a plague and problem of all the globe, but not always it's organized. So we are trying to focus on organized feature of this hate speech in Azerbaijan against Armenians. So, and by the way, you can find the reports, as Mr. Beglarian said, by the entrance, and you are free to have a copy, but not too many copies, because the copies are limited. So, as you can see, we have there different levels of hate speech, including state officials, non-state figures, as well as media and educational materials. And, which is also very important, we have some legal approach and international legal analysis, which is one of the first published as some of the best experts in this area were in the team of this reporting, and you can find interesting conclusions based on international law. Now I'm going to bring some examples from that report. Let's start with an easy thing. So this is a media thing. We do not say, this is Azerbaijani media, we do not say that Mkhitaryan and Movsisyan, the famous Armenian football players, are talentless players. Just the contrary, no one can question their talent, even though they have one shortcoming. They were unfortunate enough to be born Armenians. This is not a joke, this is a very serious text from Azerbaijani media. So they feel and they think that the best of Armenians are always have one shortcoming, that they are unfortunate enough to be born Armenians. Let's go into more serious situations. So Wunderlich newspaper based in Baku, a separate department should be created. This is an editorial. Created within the Ministry of National Security to investigate the Armenian blood among the population. For example, the parents who intend to marry their children could apply to the department to check if their future relatives have blood related to Armenians, and maybe by then we can clear our blood from mixing with dirty Armenian blood. This is documented. By the way, if you find these examples, you can find these examples in the report. There are proper links, and you can go to the sources and they are still on the web. Let's go on, and one more example. The Armenian women are, this is not only Armenophobic but also sexistic thing. You can read on the slide. The Armenian women are delaying the bomb with an inevitably mortal outcome. The Armenians' imperial strategies, so people are putting that theory in the heads of Azerbaijani people, especially youth, that they are imperial strategists. I don't know. Armenian imperial strategists have elaborated a plan of eliminating the Turkic people as single unities through genetic and mixing blood, which they have put into implementation. This is also a very read article in another Azerbaijani media. This is an example of how it works. So a professor at the university in Azerbaijan described his students quite enthusiastically in vivid colors how he would suffocate, bare-banded even a little Armenian child without any pity. The professor wrote theory of radio journalism and worked as TV, radio at the same time. So this is how people work on the issue. When we talk about education and media, we can, as we saw, in some areas they are interconnected, and now we are turning to an educational part of it. So as a renowned Azerbaijani human rights activist, human rights defender, Leyla Yunus was described, since they are 10 years old, the children are made to believe that the Azerbaijani's enemies are the Christians, and the Armenians are called faithless people in black garments. Now I will bring some examples of totally hatred towards Armenians in Azerbaijani educational literature. Please pay attention. This is a text, the sly and corrupt Armenians. This is a text from 10th grade of history textbook. And pay attention on the phrases and language that is used there. The sly and corrupt Armenians lied to them, signing the treaty in one place and making a massacre in the other. Our eternal enemies, the Armenians, the Armenian nationalists, and so on and so forth. This is an example that I like the most. So it's a story about, I think it's 5th grade. Let's go on and we'll see it's 5th grade, right? No. This is? Yeah, it's 5th grade. It's a story about a really brave Azerbaijani general during the Second World War named Hazi Aslanov. General Hazi Aslanov, I think, was the most prominent Azerbaijani during the Second World War. And he was heading a brigade of, a tank brigade. And in January 1945, he was killed in action. And look what is written in the textbook of so-called fatherland in 5th grade. Who knows, maybe in revealing the circumstances of his death, another case of base Armenian perfidy and treachery will be unearthed. So there is no evidence that Armenians could have been any relation to that issue, but always, if something wrong is occurred to Azerbaijani, if nobody knows what is the reason, so Armenians are the reason. So this is how it works. Now we can go to another text, which is not textbook, but supplementary material for middle school. Look at the language. So it's a forward to the collection of short stories, supplemental reading for middle school students. Look, pay attention to the text. Again, the same offending and the same hatred text. The enemy turned it into a weapon against us. They drew their druggers to stab in the back those who had given them refuge, and so on and so forth. These examples are one of the tens and dozens and hundreds in Azerbaijani educational literature and especially media. And in March 2018, one of the most viral of social media, maybe you even remember, we found that Azerbaijani children in kindergarten, in preschool, are taught to hate Armenians, literally. And we found out that we decided to go to Stepanakert kindergarten, and they asked the same question as the teacher in Baku was asking to their children. Who are your enemies? And it was so funny that we decided to make a video on it with different answers from Azerbaijani and Armenian children from Stepanakert. We can do it technically, So it's described, there are English subtitles. Here is the teacher in preschool. Who are our enemies? And the answer was by four Armenians, and they should. All the children had learned the lesson well. Everybody was praised for an answer. And the child is describing why Armenians are enemies, different stories, they killed us and so on. And now we go to Nartsakh's preschool, and we see that that question that, frankly, we shouldn't have asked to children like this. And one say Spider-Man, and another say another cartoon movie hero, negative heroes of cartoon movies. So this is something that we try to show that we don't need to make the same situation. We can go to in the two directions. First, make Stepanakert preschool children also answer that our enemies are Azerbaijani, or make Baku children answer that, again, the same heroes from cartoons or something else. I think we need to do anything in our capacity to have the second scenario, but not the first scenario. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Beglarian. Thank you very much, Mr. Melikian. So this shows once again that there is in fact no military solution to the conflict. Seeding hatred and intolerance can only trigger similar feelings, and this cannot lead to anywhere meaningful, nor can it lead to sustainable solution to the conflict. So there is genuine need to talk about this very dangerous phenomenon in Azerbaijan, And I'm sure that there are also many people in Azerbaijan who are aware of this, who are conscious of this, yet it is important also for them to understand that what the government and the authorities are doing for their short-term gain, namely keeping people mobilized, this is actually highly dangerous, and that this is not the way. I would like to present our next guest speaker. It is a pleasure for me to introduce him, Mr. Alexander Lapshin, a well-known Russian-Israeli traveler and blogger who has visited more than 140 countries of the world. In 2016, Mr. Lapshin was arrested in Minsk, Belarus, at the request of the Azerbaijani authorities and extradited to Baku because of his visit to Artsakh. Next year, Mr. Lapshin received a pardon after being brutally attacked in the Azerbaijani prison and being delivered to hospital. Despite the numerous threats and intimidation, Mr. Lapshin continues speaking up. His contribution was focused on the use of international police institutions as a tool to oppress freedom of expression. The floor is yours, Mr. Lapshin.
Thank you. It was a really brilliant day for all of us. As was said, on December 2016, I was arrested in Minsk, in the west of Azerbaijan, because of my tourist visit to Nagorno-Karabakh on 2011, which means actually 6 years before I was arrested. What makes this case special is that the illegal corruption waste used by Azerbaijan became evident because of the huge fault made by the Belarus president Alexander Lukashenko. At a press conference, he was asked what would happen to blogger Lapshin, Russian citizen, who is in your jail here in Minsk. And he said he was arrested in request of Interpol. Later, Interpol just refused this thing and made a statement that I'd never been in the wanted list at all. And also Lukashenko said that Lapshin will be sent to Azerbaijan anyway because of the Belarusian court just received the order from him personally. And Azerbaijan, in order to prosecute persons who are obstructing them, uses loopholes in an official convention of social legal assistance signed between all the ex-Soviet countries. This convention allows the extradition of any wanted person on the basis of solely the decision of the courts of the Western country. The country which requests for arrest or extradition is field, it doesn't even check the essence of the charges. So they do it automatically. The convention has long been turned into an instrument of prosecution of journalists, human rights activists, and politicians throughout the ex-Soviet Union. On 7th of February 2017, I was extradited to Azerbaijan by a family personal jet. I have spent 7 months in Azerbaijan jail in a solitary cell. And then on 10th of September 2017, I was brutally attacked by 4 masked men. And then delivered to the hospital in Baku in a critical condition and critical first. But I was lucky enough to survive. I spent a number of days in a coma, and then suddenly I was pardoned by the President Aliyev. Actually, I did not request it at all. And then released to Israel. So immediately after landing in Tel Aviv, I was taken to Israeli hospital, where it was concluded that it was a homicide attempt in Azerbaijan, and not suicide, as it was stated in the media. Based on Israeli, Russian, and American medical expertise, I have applied to the Human Rights Court in Strasbourg against the government of Azerbaijan. To be honest, I have nothing to do with the Karabakh conflict. I am not Armenian, and I got enough troubles in Israel where I lived for almost 30 years, where I served 3 years in the army on the Lebanese border. And however, regardless of my desire, Azerbaijan forcibly made me into this conflict. And as a Jew, many of whose relatives were killed by German Nazis during the Holocaust in Poland and Lithuania, I see some parallels between Nazi Germany and today's Azerbaijan. Their relations with the people of Armenian descent, again, instead of Jews this time, which is today the basis of the state policy of Azerbaijan. In fact, Armenophobia is the basis for the existence and survival of Azerbaijan regime, drowned in corruption and crimes against its own people. For example, during the interrogations in a Baku prison, Azerbaijani investigators and prosecutors did not hesitate to say terrible things to me. For example, a senior investigator with the rank of colonel named Vulgar Nasibov and Kamal Talibov, who is the son of High Court Chief of Azerbaijan. They repeatedly said the Armenian genocide is an invention of Armenians. If there was a real genocide, Azerbaijan would not have problems with Karabakh at all, because it could be Armenian free. Other investigators and policemen made endless dirty remarks about the Armenian women. For example, Armenian females are incapable to do anything except to serve Muslim men. Repeatedly I was called by some official Armenian prostitute, you serve the dirty Armenians, and some prison guards and policemen made insulting remarks about Jews. For example, what's a pity that Adolf Hitler did not exterminate my grandmas and grandpas, so they would not give birth to someone like me. These things are not only contrary to the criminal code and morality, but also to Islam, the religion of actually peace and tolerance. I'd like also to mention some examples of aggressive Armenophobia. This could be found in the prosecution documents issued by the Prosecutor General Office of Azerbaijan, and his name is Rustam Usubov. It's clearly stated that the fact that Lapshin, means me, in his travel blog indicated the name of the region as Artsakh, so Armenian name, and not Karabakh, the Azerbaijani one, is a violation of Azerbaijani law and should be considered as the open calls for separatism. It turns out that Azerbaijan demands the return of Karabakh, but openly states in official documents that Armenians do not have the right to use their own native language and the traditional geographical names. Also, using the criminal persecution of innocent tourists visiting Karabakh, the Azerbaijani authorities are trying to deprive the inhabitants of this region from any contacts with the outside world. I would like also to add some things. During the last months, I received a number of official written warnings from both the country for my citizenship, Israel and Russia. Both of them warned me that the government of Azerbaijan is extremely outraged and worried because of my work to attract world attention to lawless prevalent in Azerbaijan. They have initiated 2 new criminal cases against me last month, this time having created the charges of so-called calls against the state as personal result of President Ilham. Absolutely absurd, trumped-up charges, given that they have nothing to do with Azerbaijan, with government, or their future. I don't care about Azerbaijan. And actually, the Karabakh conflict is a little bit far away from me, because we have enough problems with the Palestinian case. So my only goal this time is to punish the criminals who attempt to kill me and fight for freedom of expression. In any case, I'm pleased that this time Israel, Russia, and the European Union are completely on my side, and the Interpol also indicated that any attempt by Azerbaijan to put my name on the wanted list will be evaluated critically. So that's it, actually. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lapshin. We wish you all success in all these court procedures and hope that they are finished soon. And thank you for your cooperation very much. Now it's time to give the floor to our audience. You're welcome to ask questions to our guest speakers. This is a unique opportunity. And I would like to simply ask you to introduce yourself first, and then say who you would like to address the question to. The floor is open. Who would like to ask the first question? Yes. Yes, please.
My name is Gasim Ibrahimov. I am from Azerbaijan. I study Italy. We are talking about Armenophobia, but children in Armenia are brought up in the spirit of hate towards Turks and Azerbaijan. You want us to forget about the violence committed by your armed force 25 years ago, while you yourself are trying to convince the whole world to recognize so-called Armenian genocide, which happened more than 100 years ago. Yes, this policy provokes phobia, but Turkophobia, don't you think that this could be one of the real reasons of so-called Armenian phobia?
Okay, your question, please, and who is it addressed to?
don't you think that this could be one of the real reasons of the called Armenophobia?
You would like to
I mean, no. This policy provokes phobia, but Turkophobia. I said before, in Armenia, the children brought up in the spirit of hate towards Turks and Azerbaijan.
Yes, please, Mr. Melikan, would you like to answer?
Thanks for the question. We always hear many questions like this, many statements like this. What I call for is to talk with facts. I cannot deny, and it's impossible to deny, that some reaction to Armenophobia in Azerbaijani society exists in both Armenian societies, in first Armenian state and the second Armenian state. And unfortunately it's natural, but that's the reaction, and the numbers and the problem cannot be compared to what we can see in Azerbaijan. So we have documented what we have already documented, and we presented that. And I think it would be very productive if the dialogue will start with the facts, and the outcome of dialogue would be curing the societies and really trying to make the societies ready to peace, and not just making statements. I would like to have dialogue and not 2 or 3 different monologues. Thanks.
There is one question there, and then you. Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm a student from Bilgi University from Turkey, and I want to share a small experience of mine, and after my question probably will be for Mr. Zarakolu. When I recently graduated from Bilgi University, I was the Armenian student then, and I have an Azerbaijani friend in my classroom, and I always tried to have a friend with her, and she was always in distance with me. And one day she just packed me up in toilet when we don't have our phones with us, and she was like, I want to be friends with you, but don't forget that I will be back in Baku. So this was something surprising for me. I was, what that means, I will be back in Baku. The situation was that having Armenian friends, having Armenian schoolmates, it's a problem, and if you have a contact and you still being in contact with them if you are living in Baku. So that was kind of sad historic for me. And I can say that the problematic with Turks and Azeris, because I try to have a contact with both of them during my studies there, and the problem is that Turks are more open to be, Turkish people are more open to have a dialogues, even if we have or don't have the same ideas. I think that in 1915 that was a genocide, they think that that was a war situation, doesn't matter, but we can talk to each other. So the thing that we have a huge lack between our neighbor Azeris and between Armenians is a real lack of dialogue. To just overcome the hate that we have, as you mentioned, for Turks and Armenians, first we should talk to each other, even if we don't share the same ideas, but we have to talk each other. And now my question should be to Mr. Zarakolu maybe, because he is an academician in Turkey. Do you think that actually Turkish open-minded friends and youngs could just be a bridge between Armenians and Azeris? Because they are more, let's say, more close to Azeris by their culture, by language, by everything. Could they be a bridge instead of being obstacle or adding other type of anti-Armenian propagandas? Maybe they could have another role to just help constructing something. Thank you.
Thank you. Really very important question. Unfortunately, I must tell there is no relation with Azerbaijani progressive people or human rights defenders. but also it shows how they are under the pressure. The Azerbaijani girl told you, I will go back to Baku. So we couldn't contact with Azeri circles. You know, there was an Azerbaijani writer had serious problems because only he wrote a book, not about the genocide, but a literal book and human-based, and he couldn't, he lost his job and many problems. I met with some Azerbaijani human rights defenders. They had to leave Azerbaijan. And but you are right, we must try more and more to contact. Unfortunately, only ultra-national circles have connections with Azerbaijan, but not progressive people have enough relations. So it is also our wrong, I think. But also, I must add, Azerbaijan is very aggressive. My friend, he is a very important scholar and contribution for Armenian Turkish dialogue, Said Çetinoğlu. He visited Astak, and then there was a legal procedure against him and other friends like you. And in Turkey, the prosecutor called them for interrogation because of the demand of the Azerbaijan without permission to go Azeri land. The accusation is that. But they are lucky they were not sent to Turkey like you.
I have to admit that I used to be a